Hey guys, tonight we drift far back along the golden riverbanks of the Nile to a place where the morning sun rises not only on fields of barley and flax, but also upon temples so immense they seem carved out of the dawn itself. You stand barefoot in cool sand, feeling that faint tremble of the earth that happens just before the day begins. You're in ancient Egypt, somewhere around the time when pharaohs still claimed to speak with gods, and cats were practically minor celebrities. You'll be fine here. Well, mostly fine, unless you forget to bow when you pass a sacred statue. You probably won't survive that kind of faux pas. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air is thick and cool this early in the day, with a faint scent of damp mud and lotus drifting from the water. Across the river, the first rays of sunlight slide down the colossal pylons of a temple complex. Twin towers of sandstone rising like the edges of a mountain. Their carved surfaces are crowded with stories. Kings smiting enemies, gods blessing harvests, and strange winged suns hovering above doorways. You can't help but trace a finger along one of the hieroglyphs, each mark as clean as if it were cut yesterday. Around you, the Nile begins to stir. Fishermen untie papyrus boats. Women balance water jars on their heads, walking toward the banks with the slow grace of people who've done this every day of their lives. A boy guides a skinny cow down a narrow path toward the fields, humming a tune older than the pyramids. The rhythmic slap of washing clothes on stone echoes faintly across the water. It's here, in this blend of water, light, and labor, that worship quietly begins. Not in a grand ceremony, not yet, but in the unspoken gratitude of ordinary life. The Nile has flooded on time this year, leaving behind dark, rich silt. The crops will grow, the people will eat. And so, before anything else, before work or trade or chatter, there's a moment when even the farmers pause and look toward the rising sun, whispering a thank you to Ra, the sun god, as he pushes his fiery boat into the sky again. You follow the slow procession of priests walking toward the temple gate. They move with the kind of focus that only comes from repetition. The same steps, the same prayers, every single day for decades. Each priest wears a linen kilt, freshly washed, and his head is shaved smooth. You catch a faint glint of oil on their skin, used to keep away insects and maybe bad spirits. They carry little bundles of herbs, juniper, myrrh, maybe frankincense, the kind that when burned turn the air into something sacred and slightly choking. Historians still argue whether ordinary Egyptians truly believed their priests could speak directly with the gods, or whether they simply hoped someone, anyone, was keeping the divine machinery running smoothly. But as you watch the sun touch the temple gate and hear the first low chant roll out, it's easy to believe something powerful is at work here. The main priest stops just before the massive doorway, raising both hands. The chanting softens to a murmur. Then, in one practiced motion, he sprinkles water from the Nile over the threshold. This isn't just symbolic. Water was life, purification, and renewal. Without it, no ritual could begin. Some texts even describe how priests would drink a small sip of Nile water each morning, believing it contained traces of divine energy. A modern person might call that optimistic, considering what might be floating in there. The first light hits the gate's lintel, and for a moment, the whole temple seems to breathe. The carvings glow faintly gold. The air warms. You can feel that this isn't just architecture, it's alignment. Temples like this one were built according to exact astronomical calculations, often positioned so that sunlight would pierce the inner sanctuary only on certain days, solstices, festivals, or anniversaries of gods. It's one of those moments now. The first shaft of sunlight slides cleanly between the pylons and spills across the central path. The priests step forward. A faint hum rises, deep and resonant, like bees under stone. Someone begins tapping a small sistrum, a kind of bronze rattle that sounds like distant rain. The rhythm is soft, hypnotic. You find yourself falling into step without realizing it. You pass under the shadow of the pylons and into the temple's outer court. The shift is immediate, from bright sunlight to cool shadow, from open sky to carved enclosure. The air smells faintly of smoke and old stone. The walls around you are painted in colors that time has only partly faded. Deep blues, dusty reds, and the gold of God's crowns. The columns rise higher than palm trees, their tops shaped like blooming papyrus. There's a sense that you've stepped out of ordinary time. Outside, the farmers will begin their day. The merchants will haggle. Children will chase each other through narrow alleys. But here, the world moves differently. Every sound, every breath seems measured. A priest pauses near a shallow basin and dips his hands, washing meticulously, 3 times for each arm, then his mouth, then his head. The Egyptians were obsessed with ritual purity. Even the slightest impurity, a speck of dust, a single hair, could, in their minds, offend the gods. Archaeologists have found detailed records of these purification routines, including what oils to use and what not to eat the night before. One tablet even warns priests to avoid onions, for they make the breath offensive to the gods. Fair enough. You notice something small and easy to miss, a young acolyte standing by the doorway, his eyes wide, clutching a papyrus scroll. He's memorizing the morning prayers. The old priest beside him nods slightly, as if saying, "You'll get there." That's how knowledge was passed, not in classrooms, but in whispers, repetition, imitation. There's no written manual on how to speak to gods. You just live it until it becomes muscle memory. A quirky tidbit, some temples had official cats to keep away mice that threatened papyrus scrolls or stored grain. Killing one, even by accident, was a capital offense. The gods apparently liked their paperwork and their cats, well protected. The chanting swells again, low and melodic, echoing through the stone. The sound doesn't feel loud exactly. It's more like it seeps into you. The temple amplifies it, bouncing it softly from wall to wall until even silence hums. It's easy to imagine that's how the gods prefer to be addressed, not in shouts, but in steady, rhythmic devotion that never really ends, only cycles with the sun. As you stand there, watching the smoke twist upward and vanish into the dim ceiling, you realize that this isn't just a morning ceremony. It's a conversation that's been going on for thousands of mornings. Every priest, every offering, every whispered prayer adds another line to a dialogue that never fully ends. You're just listening in for one quiet moment. Outside, the world grows brighter. You can hear the buzz of life beginning, oars splashing, birds calling, distant laughter. Inside, time holds its breath. You step a little further in, drawn by the faint glimmer of something deeper, the promise of the inner halls, where gods sleep and wake by ritual command. You adjust your breathing, matching the slow rhythm of the chant, and move toward the next gate. The sandstone under your feet feels cool and faintly gritty. You wonder, just for a second, if anyone, God or human, truly hears all these prayers. Then, a stray breeze carries a thread of incense across your face, sweet and sharp and strangely comforting. The scent pulls you forward. Whatever waits inside, it's part of the rhythm now, part of the daily act of faith that keeps the sun rising, the river flowing, and the world gently, quietly turning. You take your first careful steps toward the great gateway, where the temple's pylons stretch up like twin cliffs. Each one is covered with carvings so dense they look alive in the shifting sunlight. Rows of hieroglyphs, falcons with wings spread, the long, angular limbs of kings bowing before gods. Up close, you notice how uneven the stone feels under your fingers. The centuries have softened its edges, but the weight of meaning still presses outward, as if the stories themselves are trying to breathe through the rock. The priests move ahead in a slow procession, their linen robes whispering against the floor. The great gate looms larger with every step, its shadow swallowing you in a cool hush. Somewhere, water drips steadily, a rhythm so quiet you almost mistake it for your heartbeat. You pause at the threshold, where the sunlight ends and the temple begins, and it strikes you that this doorway isn't just an entrance, it's a boundary, a crossing between the human world, noisy, dusty, full of fish guts and gossip, and the divine one, heavy with silence and incense. Ancient Egyptians took boundaries seriously. To them, every threshold carried power. The temple's outer wall marked the line between chaos and order. Stepping through it was like moving from the unpredictable desert into the carefully organized world of the gods. Even the direction you faced mattered. Temples were usually built on an east-west axis so that the rising sun could illuminate the inner sanctuary, symbolizing rebirth every morning. The geometry itself was prayer in stone. You stop for a moment beneath the lintel and tilt your head up. The space above you is carved with rows of stars, hundreds of five-pointed bursts painted deep blue, the color of eternity. Someone, centuries ago, stood on a wooden scaffold, brush in hand, painting each tiny dot by oil lamp. It's a strangely tender thought, a human touch in all this stone. The priest ahead raises a small bronze mirror to catch a sliver of sunlight. He turns it, carefully reflecting the light onto a carved figure of Horus, the falcon-headed god of the sky. The flash of gold dances across the wall, and for a brief instant the god seems to shimmer. Historians still argue whether this was purely symbolic or whether the Egyptians genuinely believed the gods absorbed sunlight like living beings. Either way, you can see the intention. Light itself is treated as sacred, a physical presence guiding the way deeper in. A faint murmur of voices drifts from behind you. Villagers, travelers, petitioners who will wait outside all day hoping for blessings or answers. You realize you're now one of the few allowed past this point. Most people never step through the gate. They leave offerings in the outer courtyard, bread, beer, flowers, and trust the priests to deliver the message. You, though, keep moving forward, feeling the coolness wrap around your skin like a linen shroud. Inside, the brightness of the world fades. The air thickens with the scent of frankincense and melted beeswax. You hear a low hum from deeper within the halls, the sound of chanting, a tone so even and repetitive it almost sounds mechanical, though no one here has ever seen a machine. You move slowly because your eyes haven't quite adjusted to the gloom yet. The floor is polished limestone, faintly damp from the morning's purification. Every step feels deliberate. Even the temple cats walk differently in here, tails upright, paws silent. They glance at you with that faint, smug look cats have perfected over the millennia. Somewhere up ahead, one jumps onto an altar and knocks over a small dish of oil. The priest nearby doesn't even flinch. In Egypt, cats aren't just tolerated, they're miniature embodiments of grace. One might even belong to Bastet, goddess of the home, pleasure, and protection. Which means, yes, you could technically be walking past a minor deity right now who also licks her own fur. The structure around you grows narrower, more confined. Pillars close in, each one carved to resemble bundled reeds or papyrus stems. The farther you go, the darker the stone becomes, and the deeper the silence. Only the occasional rattle of a sistrum breaks it, that gentle metallic shake that sounds a bit like wind through glass. You realize something subtle but clever about the design. The deeper you walk, the lower the ceilings get and the dimmer the light. It's not accidental. The architects intended to create a sense of progression, from the brightness of the mortal world outside to the dim, eternal stillness of the divine within. The temple is, in a sense, a physical metaphor for enlightenment turned inward. One priest ahead turns to you and gestures wordlessly for you to stop. He holds a bowl filled with what looks like milky water, a mix of natron and Nile water used for purification. With a practiced motion, he sprinkles droplets over your hands. The liquid is cold and slightly gritty. You're being cleansed before moving farther in. You think briefly about modern hygiene standards and decide it's best not to ask too many questions. Here's a small, quirky fact. Archaeologists once found graffiti carved into the stones of a temple similar to this one. It read, "I was here on this day, serving the god." Even in the most sacred spaces, it seems, humans can't resist leaving a signature. Maybe it's a kind of offering too, a way of saying, "I existed, I believed." The priests resume walking. The passageway opens suddenly into a wide hall where sunlight filters through narrow slits high above. The beams slice through the smoke like solid pillars, turning the dust into gold. You notice how the light lands exactly on a carved relief, the pharaoh offering lotus blossoms to Amun-Ra. Everything is measured, aligned, intentional. Nothing is random here. You trace your fingers along a hieroglyphic line. The shapes are crisp: an owl, a seated man, a coiled rope. You don't know what they say, but you can feel that they matter. Every symbol here is a tiny piece of order in a world constantly flirting with chaos. That's what Egyptian religion really was, not fear of death or obsession with the afterlife, as people sometimes say, but an enormous, lifelong effort to keep things steady, predictable, balanced. Ma'at, the principle of truth, balance, and harmony, was the foundation of everything. Still, even among the calm, you can sense a flicker of unease. Maybe it's the way the walls seem to narrow slightly, or how the light feels almost alive, shifting and pulsing as incense smoke drifts through it. You remember that this temple isn't just a house for gods, it's also a map of the universe. The outer courtyard represents the human world, the inner sanctuary, the heavens. Every doorway you cross is a step closer to the divine center and farther from the world you know. Some historians argue that walking through a temple was intended to be a symbolic journey through creation, a reenactment of the first sunrise, the moment the universe emerged from chaos. You're moving through that story now, one footstep at a time. The sand outside might still be warm with the morning sun, but here, the air feels ancient, thick, almost underwater. A priest begins a low recitation beside you. His voice echoes softly, steady as a heartbeat. Syllables in a language so old that even the word old seems inadequate. He's reciting a hymn to Ptah, the creator god of craftsmen. It praises the god's tongue, the divine word that shapes reality. It's beautiful in a way, the idea that the world itself began with speech, with a word. Maybe that's why every sound in this place feels significant. Ahead, another doorway glimmers faintly with gold leaf, its edges worn smooth by centuries of fingertips. You pause, letting your eyes linger on the delicate engraving of an ankh, the symbol of life, repeated over and over. It's humbling, realizing how many people have walked this same path, offered the same prayers, and then disappeared into time like footprints in silt. You stand there for a long moment, breathing in the resin and smoke, feeling the weight of the temple's silence pressing gently against your thoughts. It's not a frightening silence, more like the hush before a whisper. Beyond the doorway lies the heart of the temple, where only a select few may go. But for now, you linger here at the edge of divinity, between sunlight and shadow, between the world you came from and the one that waits within. Outside, the Nile glitters under full morning light. The day has begun. Inside, time remains suspended, caught forever in the slow pulse of chant and incense. You take one last look back through the massive gate, the bright sky framed like a painting, and realize how far you've already crossed. The priests move deeper into the temple's interior, and you follow, your footsteps muffled against smooth limestone floors. The air grows heavier now, thicker with incense and the faint metallic tang of burned oil. The chant that began outside has changed. It's slower, quieter, as if the words themselves are careful not to wake something ancient sleeping behind the next wall. You come into a wide chamber that feels both cavernous and intimate. The ceiling is high enough that it disappears into darkness, but every column and wall gleams faintly from the light of flickering lamps. These aren't open flames. They're small bowls filled with oil and floating wicks, tended constantly so they never go out. The Egyptians believed that light was more than illumination. It was divine essence, a fragment of the sun brought indoors. Each flame here is like a miniature Ra, keeping the darkness respectful rather than absolute. The morning ritual begins in earnest. At the far end of the chamber stands a low altar carved with sacred images, lotus flowers, falcons, ankhs, and a small statue of a god, perhaps Amun or Osiris. The figure is barely 2 feet tall, but its presence seems to fill the room. Its eyes are inlaid with dark obsidian that glints like wet stone. A thin thread of incense smoke curls around its face, giving the illusion of breath. A priest approaches the altar and begins the first offering of the day. You can almost taste the incense now, bitter, woody, and faintly sweet. He sprinkles a mixture of resins and herbs into a bronze burner, and immediately the smoke thickens, twisting upward in lazy ribbons. The smell seeps into your hair, your clothes, your very skin. Then, with solemn precision, another priest lifts a tray piled with bread, onions, and a few small fish. The offering is simple, nothing extravagant, but every motion is performed with absolute care. Bread is placed on the altar, water poured into a shallow basin, a handful of flowers scattered across the floor. These are gifts for the gods, symbolic of life's sustenance. No one eats them here. Later, they'll be distributed among the temple staff, blessed by divine proximity. Think of it as a very ancient version of catered leftovers, except the catering company is eternal and slightly terrifying. You watch as the chief priest raises both arms toward the statue. His voice carries softly through the air, the words rising and falling in the ancient rhythm of offering. Though you don't understand the language, you can feel the pattern of it, each phrase balanced carefully, as if weighted with invisible scales. Historians still argue whether priests believed the gods truly consumed the offerings or if the rituals were more symbolic, feeding the spiritual essence of the divine rather than the physical form. Either way, the process is exacting. The statue must be awakened, the god invited to inhabit it, and then nourished through ritual care. There are records of morning routines where priests would literally wash and dress the statue each day, treating it as a living being. One such text, called The Ritual of Opening the Mouth, describes how priests touch the lips of a divine statue, or even a mummy, with a ceremonial tool to open its senses, to let it see, breathe, and hear once again. Imagine the reverence. A team of men moving in slow unison, gently waking up their god each morning like an ancient alarm clock powered by devotion. You shift your weight, feeling the slight ache of standing still too long. The smoke swirls around you, soft and dreamy. The light flickers over the faces of the priests, making their expressions unreadable, part human, part myth. Nearby, a younger attendant kneels by a large ceramic jar,
stirring a mixture of honey and crushed dates. It's an offering too, sweetness for the gods, symbolic of joy and plenty. The Egyptians believed that scent and flavor carried spiritual energy. Pleasing aromas attracted divine attention. Some rituals even included perfumed oils made from imported flowers and spices worth more than gold. A single drop could buy a goat. A full jar could buy silence from the gods, or at least hope for it. The temple cat wanders back into view, tail flicking lazily, and stops near a small bowl of milk placed discreetly at the edge of the altar. Maybe it's part of the ritual, or maybe someone just knows that ignoring a cat brings worse luck than offending a deity. Either way, the animal laps quietly, unconcerned by the grandeur of it all. You start to notice how every sense is engaged here. The sound of chanting, the smell of incense, the play of shadow, the faint roughness of carved stone beneath your fingertips. It's not just ceremony, it's immersion. You're surrounded by symbolism that never stops whispering its message, that order must be maintained, that time itself depends on these gestures repeating, unbroken. One priest begins to fan the altar gently with a palm frond, spreading the incense smoke evenly. Another pours wine into a shallow bowl, tilting it carefully so that a single drop spills onto the floor. A libation for the earth, a quiet thank you to the ground for holding up the temple. Even gratitude has a ritual here. And here's a curious fact. Archaeologists have found traces of burnt goose fat and resin deep inside temple altars, evidence of ancient offerings long since turned to dust. Some even discovered bread molds shaped like tiny animals or symbolic hieroglyphs. It turns out that food for the gods wasn't always metaphoric. Sometimes it was just really tiny baked goods with cosmic significance. As you stand there, breathing in the perfumed air, you begin to feel something peculiar. Not awe exactly, but calm. There's a rhythm to all of this, an almost hypnotic repetition that slows the pulse. The world outside, with its endless noise and urgency, fades away. Inside the temple, time doesn't move forward, it circles. Every morning is the same sacred beginning. Every offering renews creation. The gods never tire, and neither do their servants. You glance at the statue again. The light from the lamps makes its face shimmer faintly, and for an instant it feels alive, as if the stone itself inhales. Maybe it's just the flickering shadows, or maybe the Egyptians were onto something when they said that divine essence could inhabit matter. Historians debate whether this belief was literal or symbolic, but standing here, you can't help but sense a quiet pulse in the air, an awareness that watches from behind the carved eyes. The chanting rises once more, softer this time, slower, the words drawn out like sighs. The priests bow, their foreheads touching the floor. You do the same without thinking, and the coolness of the stone feels strangely grounding. When they rise again, the leader extinguishes one lamp, signaling that the morning ritual has ended. The god has been fed, blessed, and appeased. The balance of the cosmos is secure for another day. There's a faint shuffle as the priests begin to withdraw. The offerings will remain until dusk, when another ceremony replaces them. The bread will harden, the flowers wilt, and yet the meaning remains as fresh as the first sunrise. You realize that's the heart of Egyptian religion, permanence through repetition. It's not about dramatic revelation. It's about the comfort of knowing that every gesture, every word has been tested by centuries and found enough to keep the world turning. As you turn to leave the offering chamber, your eyes linger one last time on the small statue. The smoke around it is thinning now, rising lazily toward the ceiling like breath in cold air. The priests have gone silent. The only sound left is the soft rustle of your footsteps and the faint hiss of oil lamps. You feel the urge to whisper a thank you, not to any specific god, but to the quiet itself. Because in this temple, Silence isn't empty, it's full. It hums softly with memory, with devotion, with the kind of peace that only comes from doing something sacred in exactly the same way for thousands of years.
Outside, the Nile glitters under the sun, boats drifting, merchants calling. But in here, the morning offering lingers like perfume, invisible, eternal, and faintly sweet. The moment you step farther in, the light changes again, softer now, filtered through narrow stone slits high above. The air feels dense and slightly sweet, as if centuries of burning incense have soaked into the walls themselves. You can almost taste the resin on your tongue, the faint trace of lotus, honey, and smoke. You wander through a colonnade where each pillar is carved to resemble a bundle of papyrus reeds, their capitals blooming like flowers frozen in stone. The walls are covered from floor to ceiling with painted reliefs, gods with animal heads, queens offering lotus blossoms, pharaohs depicted forever young. The colors, deep cobalt, faded crimson, flakes of gold leaf, glow faintly in the lamplight. Even after millennia, the artistry feels alive. This is the temple's heart of beauty, not the dark secret sanctuary yet, but the space that prepares you for it. Here, the senses rule. The Egyptians believed that beauty itself was divine, a way of connecting with the gods through sight, scent, and touch. The walls were more than decoration, they were prayers carved into color. A priest walks past, carrying a small bronze censer, trailing a thread of perfumed smoke. You catch a whiff of something floral, soft, and strangely familiar. Lotus oil, maybe. The Egyptians extracted perfume from the blue lotus, a flower that floated along the Nile and symbolized rebirth. It closed at night and reopened each morning, mirroring the sun's cycle. They used it in rituals, in cosmetics, even in wine. Archaeologists once found traces of blue lotus in ancient jars, and for years, scholars debated whether it had mild narcotic effects. If it did, it would explain a lot about how serene everyone seems in these paintings. You pause near a tall column and notice a faint hum. Not mechanical, of course, but acoustic. The shape of the room amplifies certain frequencies of sound, especially the low notes of chanting. The Egyptians mastered this effect without any modern instruments. They designed temples to sing back at you. If you whisper here, the sound folds around the stone and returns softer, almost like a reply. Historians still argue whether that resonance was intentional architecture or a lucky accident of acoustics. But standing here, you can't help but think they knew exactly what they were doing. When a priest chanted a hymn to Amun, the echo itself became part of the ritual, as if the gods were answering back. You wander slowly, fingertips grazing the wall. The carvings are smooth in some places, sharp in others. A scene unfolds across the stone. The king offering incense to Hathor, goddess of love and joy. Her face is calm, her eyes almond-shaped, her hair braided in the elegant style that once symbolized youth and vitality. In her hands, she holds a sistrum, that bronze rattle used in rituals to please the gods and banish evil. You imagine the delicate metallic clinking filling this hall long ago, blending with chants and the flicker of firelight. A priest kneels near an alcove, mixing something in a shallow dish. You lean slightly closer and catch the smell of crushed petals and oil. Perfume making was a sacred art in Egypt, often done within temple grounds. They believed scent bridged the human and divine, an invisible ladder between worlds. Some recipes have survived, written on fragile papyrus scrolls, combinations of myrrh, cinnamon, cardamom, and honey thickened into pastes. You can almost picture an ancient artisan stirring the mixture slowly over a small clay brazier, the air rich with the promise of sweetness. And here's a quirky fact. one that seems almost too modern to be true. Some wealthy Egyptians wore cone-shaped lumps of scented wax on their heads during feasts and ceremonies. As the wax melted, it released perfume, coating the skin and hair in fragrance. Imagine attending a divine ritual while your personal air freshener slowly dissolves down your neck. Luxurious? Maybe. Practical? Not so much in the desert heat. You continue down the corridor. The temple grows quieter, the air heavier, until the outside world feels like a distant dream. It's easy to understand why worship here wasn't loud or frenzied, but meditative. The Egyptians didn't shout to their gods, they whispered. They believed divinity thrived in calm, in balance, in the unhurried rhythm of breath and ritual. Even the decorations reinforce that. Lotus blossoms, papyrus, scenes of sunrise, symbols of renewal rather than conquest. Your footsteps echo softly, joined occasionally by the faint rustle of a priest's linen robe. A few bees drift lazily through a slit of light, attracted by the scent of incense. Someone nearby polishes a small copper vessel, rubbing it until it glows like sunrise. You can hear the gentle rasp of cloth against metal, the kind of sound that could lull you straight into sleep if you weren't already halfway there. You pass a narrow doorway leading to a smaller side room. Inside, a woman sits cross-legged, grinding something with a stone pestle. She's not a priest, more likely a temple worker, one of the many women who tended shrines, made offerings, or prepared ritual oils. Her movements are patient, rhythmic. She glances up briefly and smiles before returning to her work. You notice the faint shimmer of gold dust on her forearm. Even the labor here glows. The Egyptians saw no divide between art, worship, and daily duty. To grind pigments, to polish a statue, to arrange flowers, all of it was service to the divine. There's a gentle kind of spirituality in that idea, that holiness lives in repetition, in care, in doing small things beautifully. You stop again beneath a carved lintel and tilt your head back. The ceiling above you is painted deep blue and scattered with golden stars. It's the sky made eternal, not the shifting one outside, but a fixed version, forever at peace. It's easy to forget that the people who painted this were mortal, sweating, tired, sometimes probably annoyed at each other. But they painted eternity anyway, and somehow it stayed. You catch yourself wondering how many footsteps this floor has felt. Thousands? Millions? Each one leaving a faint whisper, now gone. The temple is alive with ghosts of devotion, not haunting, but serene, like soft murmurs beneath the surface of time. Somewhere deeper inside, a sistrum rattles once, then twice, and the echo lingers longer than seems possible. The air hums faintly. Maybe it's the stone breathing again, or maybe it's your own heartbeat blending with the rhythm of the ritual. Historians still debate whether common people ever entered this far, or if it was reserved for priests alone. Most agree that for ordinary Egyptians, the temple's inner beauty remained a mystery, glimpsed only during festivals when the sacred bark of the god was paraded outside. But tonight, or rather this eternal morning you're walking through, you're one of the rare few who see it from within. You move silently, careful not to disturb the dust that glows faintly in the light. The scent grows richer the deeper you go, more floral now, layered with resin and something faintly spicy. It's strangely soothing. You inhale deeply and feel your shoulders drop. There's a calm here that seeps into the bones, a kind of peace that doesn't ask for belief, only attention. You reach out to touch one last relief before the next chamber. It shows a figure seated cross-legged, Thoth, god of wisdom, with the head of an ibis, holding a writing reed. Around him are rows of hieroglyphs that seem to shimmer slightly in the lamplight. You can almost imagine him recording your steps in some divine ledger, noting the quiet awe in your breath, the soft curiosity in your gaze. Somewhere ahead, the chanting begins again,
slower, deeper, almost like a heartbeat beneath the temple. The sound draws you forward. You follow it past the final column and into the deeper shadow, where the scent of lotus fades into darkness, and silence becomes something you can feel pressing gently against your skin. The light behind you narrows to a faint golden stripe across the floor. Ahead, you sense the weight of secrecy, the next threshold, the hidden sanctuary where gods wait unseen. But before you cross, you take one last breath of this perfumed air, this mixture of stone, smoke, and living history, and you let it settle inside you like warmth. The air changes as you step forward. The scent of lotus fades into something deeper, resin, cedar, and the faint mineral tang of stone sealed away from sunlight. You have reached the heart of the temple, the place no common Egyptian would ever see. Only the high priest, purified and prepared through days of ritual, could enter this sacred space each dawn to awaken the god.
Your eyes take time to adjust. The light is almost non-existent here, only the glow of small oil lamps flickering against gold. The walls no longer teem with colorful scenes. Instead, they are carved more delicately, the figures smaller, more reverent. The deeper you move, the less the temple shouts of power and grandeur, and the more it whispers of mystery. This is not a place for spectacle. It is a chamber built for stillness.
The sanctuary is small, far smaller than the towering halls you've walked through. It's more like a cave cut into the stone, a womb of silence. The ceiling arches low, and the air is still enough that the flame of your nearby lamp trembles only when you breathe. At the center of the chamber sits a shrine, a polished wooden naos covered in gold leaf, its doors shut. Within it rests the statue of the god. The Egyptians believed that their gods did not merely symbolically inhabit these statues, they lived within them. The figure inside was not decoration. It was the physical home of the divine spirit, awakened every morning, fed, clothed, and sung to as if it were a living being. This ritual, known as the daily cult, was one of the most important acts of Egyptian religion, performed unfailingly each day for centuries. You watch as a high priest, his head shaven and his linen robe spotless, enters through a narrow doorway. His movements are deliberate, his pace unhurried. He is barefoot, his skin glistening faintly with sacred oils. Before approaching the shrine, he pauses to wash his hands in a small stone basin filled with cool, perfumed water. Purity was everything in this role. A single impurity, a stray hair, a careless word could offend the god. The priest takes a moment to breathe deeply. Then he begins to chant, his voice low and rhythmic, the syllables foreign but musical. The Egyptian language in ritual form is a sound of wind and rhythm, soft consonants and rolling vowels, shaped to match the heartbeat of the earth. The chant is not loud. It doesn't echo like the grand hymns in the outer halls. It hums, steady and circular, like a lullaby for the divine. As he chants, another attendant brings a small chest carved from cedar. Inside are miniature garments, a folded linen kilt, a beaded collar, even a delicate headdress. Each morning, the god's statue is symbolically undressed, bathed, and reclothed. A reenactment of rebirth, of the sunrise itself. The idea is simple but profound. The gods awaken with the world, and through the priest's hands, the cycle of creation begins again. The priest opens the shrine doors with care. For a moment, you glimpse the statue within, a small figure, barely 2 feet tall, gleaming faintly in the light. Its face is serene, its features timeless. The eyes, inlaid with obsidian and crystal, seem alive. You realize that even though this god has not moved in thousands of years, to those who served here, it was never still. He whispers prayers as he removes yesterday's garments. He sprinkles drops of perfumed water, wipes the statue gently with linen, and anoints it with oils, frankincense, myrrh, cedarwood. The scent fills the air, thick but calming, ancient yet familiar. He dresses the figure again, laying each piece with care, his hands steady and precise. You begin to see the ritual differently now, not as superstition, but as a quiet dialogue between human and divine. The Egyptians didn't separate the sacred from the practical. To dress a god was not unlike dressing a loved one. To feed a god, not unlike caring for a guest. It was a relationship built on respect, order, and routine. Outside, the world might be loud, soldiers drilling, merchants shouting, the Nile lapping against its banks. But here, inside the sanctuary, everything is reduced to essentials: breath, movement, silence, devotion. The high priest offers bread, beer, fruit, and incense, all symbolic sustenance for the god. Then he closes the shrine doors, sealing the divine presence back into its resting place until the next sunrise. Afterward, the leftover food, now considered blessed, will be taken out and shared among the temple staff, a literal communion between God and people. It's easy to imagine how this rhythm would give meaning to life here. Every sunrise is a resurrection, every offering a thank you for existence. The priest lingers a moment, whispering a final prayer, a farewell until morning. Then he extinguishes one lamp, leaving only the faintest flicker from another. The shadows move like smoke across the carvings, turning gods into ghosts. You stand still, almost afraid to breathe too loudly. The chamber feels weightless, suspended between worlds. In this darkness, you begin to understand what the Egyptians meant by Mahat, the sacred balance that keeps the universe steady. It's not dramatic or loud. It's this, the steady rhythm of care, the gentle maintenance of order in a chaotic world. You imagine the centuries of priests who repeated this same ritual every day without fail. Kings rose and fell, empires crumbled, but somewhere, deep within the stone, a priest was still lighting incense and dressing the god. Continuity was worship, routine was eternity. As you gaze around, you notice the small details that make this place alive. The faint soot stains on the ceiling from countless lamps. The worn groove in the floor where bare feet stood for generations. The tiny offering tables with cracked alabaster bowls. Everything bears the fingerprints of devotion. There's a kind of peace in the thought that this ritual wasn't performed for an audience. No one saw it except the priests, the statue, and the gods themselves. It was private, personal, and precise. Devotion for its own sake, without reward or recognition. You close your eyes for a moment and let the stillness sink in. Somewhere far above, you can faintly hear the muffled sounds of the outer temple. Sandals scuffing, the faint clink of copper, a distant voice calling orders. But down here, time has stopped. For a moment, you feel as if you've crossed into another kind of silence, not emptiness, but fullness. The quiet is so complete that it feels alive, like a soft breath that wraps around you. Perhaps that's what the priests felt too, that in the act of tending to the unseen, they themselves were touched by something eternal. When the high priest finally leaves, he walks backward, never turning his back on the shrine. The doors close softly, the last glimmer of light fading behind the polished wood. You stand at the threshold, half in shadow, half in memory, feeling a calm so deep it almost hums in your bones. You take one slow step backward, then another. The air cools as you move away from the shrine, but a trace of its warmth follows you. The warmth of devotion, of centuries of hands repeating the same careful gestures. The faint perfume of myrrh clings to your skin. The temple's heartbeat seems to fade behind you as you return toward the faint glow of the outer hall. The walls widen, the echo returns, and the sound of your own footsteps seems louder now, almost intrusive after that sacred hush. You glance back once more at the narrow doorway behind you. It looks so ordinary from here, just another shadow in a corridor of stone. And yet, you know that within it lies something the world has rarely felt since, a silence that was once thought to contain the breath of gods. You exhale slowly, the last trace of incense leaving your lungs. The sanctuary has done what it was built to do. It has quieted you, emptied you, and filled you all at once. You step out of the dim sanctuary and feel the world returning. Sound first, then color. The murmur of voices, the shuffle of sandals, and the flicker of daylight filtering through stone courtyards all rush back at once. Outside the sacred core of the temple, the air feels more human, less divine perhaps, but warmer, more alive. This is where ordinary Egyptians come to meet their gods in their own quiet ways. The courtyard is wide and sunlit, framed by thick columns painted in bands of faded color. Pigeons flutter between the beams, scattering a few feathers across the ground. The floor beneath your feet is worn smooth from centuries of footsteps. Farmers, fishermen, potters, mothers with children clinging to their legs, travelers passing through with small gifts in hand. You can almost hear their whispered prayers echoing faintly in the air, as though the stones themselves have learned to listen. A woman stands near a small altar carved with the symbol of Hathor, the goddess of love and music. She has brought a loaf of bread, still warm, and a few lotus petals in a woven basket. Her offering isn't grand, but her movements are careful and reverent. She bows her head and murmurs something you can't quite hear, maybe a wish for her family's health or her son's safe return from the fields. Nearby, a fisherman lays a tiny clay fish beside a shallow dish of water. His skin is darkened from long days under the sun, his hands calloused. He closes his eyes for a brief moment and then simply walks away. The act seems so small, and yet, in its simplicity, it feels complete. In ancient Egypt, religion wasn't something only for priests or kings. It wove itself through daily life like the Nile through the valley. You didn't have to enter the inner sanctum to feel the divine. You could speak to the gods from your own threshold, whisper to them over your morning bread, or carve their symbols into the lintel above your door. Even here, outside the main halls, smaller shrines cluster along the courtyard's edge. Each belongs to a different god: Isis, protector of mothers; Thoth, lord of wisdom; Bes, the squat, lion-faced guardian of sleep and laughter. Their statues are worn smooth by countless fingers. You see traces of red pigment on one, faint as a blush. Someone must have repainted it long ago, hoping to keep the god's image alive a little longer. As you walk, you notice offerings scattered everywhere. Loaves of barley bread, bowls of honey, garlands of flowers already wilting in the heat. Even a small jug of beer, left half full, the foam dried to a thin ring around the rim. It's easy to imagine someone sneaking a sip before setting it down. Devotion, after all, doesn't forbid a little thirst. A priest's assistant moves quietly among the altars, collecting items that are starting to spoil. The offerings will later be distributed among the temple workers, just like the food from the inner sanctuary. Nothing is wasted. Even devotion here is practical. Spiritual sustenance becomes physical nourishment. The air smells of incense, but also of people. Sweat, linen, bread baking somewhere beyond the walls. A child tugs at your sleeve, offering a small clay figure shaped like a cat. "For Bastet," she says with a grin. The cat goddess was beloved, a symbol of home and protection. Her statues, often carved from alabaster or bronze, stood in nearly every household. Cats themselves were sacred animals, pampered, fed, and occasionally worshipped more sincerely than most relatives. You buy the figurine for a copper shard and set it gently beside a small altar to Bastet, her ears perked as if listening. The gesture earns a toothy smile from the girl before she darts off toward the next visitor. The people around you seem to move in a rhythm, offering, bowing, whispering, leaving. There's no single grand ceremony now, just dozens of small acts of faith layering atop each other like sediment. Each prayer adds a grain to the invisible weight of devotion that fills this place. You pause beside a man reciting words to a falcon-headed statue of Horus. His voice trembles slightly. His left arm is wrapped in linen, stained with what looks like an herbal salve. You catch enough to understand. He's praying for healing. In ancient Egypt, medicine and magic weren't separate things. A physician might prescribe honey for a wound and a prayer to Sekhmet, the lioness goddess, to guard against infection. Both were essential. To heal the body without the favor of the gods was unthinkable. Somewhere in the courtyard, a scribe reads aloud from a strip of papyrus, a petition to the gods. The paper crackles softly in the breeze. You catch fragments of his words. "Grant me peace in my house. Keep my cattle safe from flood." The tone is measured, polite, like someone writing to a bureaucrat rather than a deity. Egyptians didn't plead with their gods so much as they negotiated with them, reminding them of good deeds, making reasonable requests, offering suitable payment in return. Even in prayer, order ruled. As you wander, you find a quiet corner where the wall has been blackened by candle smoke. Someone has drawn small symbols there in soot and ochre. Eyes, ankhs, spirals, perhaps scratched in by those who couldn't afford an offering. Each mark carries meaning. The eye for protection, the ankh for life, the spiral for eternity. Some are fresh, others nearly erased by time, but they all speak the same silent language. I was here. I asked. I hoped. You sit for a moment, feeling the heat of the stone beneath you. The temple hums faintly with activity, a soft chorus of faith continuing all around. It strikes you that this isn't the kind of religion that demands fear. It's gentle, woven into the pulse of living itself. For most Egyptians, the gods weren't distant or cruel. They were neighbors, companions in the daily business of staying alive. There's a story, told quietly among the locals, about a humble worker who once prayed for a god's help after dropping his wages into the Nile. He lit a small lamp and promised to offer 2 fish if the river returned the money. The next morning, a fish flopped onto the shore near his hut. Inside it, the coins. True or not, stories like that endure because they feel right. The gods in Egypt weren't unreachable. They listened, sometimes even answered, especially if you paid your debts with interest. You rise and walk toward the temple gates. A faint breeze moves through the colonnade, fluttering the linen canopies overhead. The sunlight has shifted, afternoon now, and the golden edges of the columns shimmer faintly. People continue to drift in and out, their faces calm, almost sleepy. The temple feels less like a monument and more like a breathing organism, fed by the slow rhythm of faith. Historians still argue whether ordinary Egyptians truly understood the theology behind all these rituals. Did they know the elaborate myths of Osiris and Isis, or the symbolic meanings carved into the walls? Or did they simply follow tradition, doing what their parents and grandparents had done before them, trusting that it worked? Maybe belief didn't need understanding. Maybe it was enough to show up, offer bread, and hope the gods noticed. You glance toward a nearby alcove where a blind man sits cross-legged, plucking a stringed instrument. The melody drifts lazily across the courtyard, slow and haunting, like sunlight rippling on the water. People toss small offerings at his feet, coins, food, a few flowers. In ancient Egypt, even music could be a form of worship. To play for the gods was to speak their language in tones rather than words. As the sound mingles with the smell of incense and the low murmur of prayer, the air takes on a strange calm. You realize how deeply peace and repetition were intertwined here. Every act, no matter how small, was part of maintaining ma'at, that perfect balance between chaos and order. Before you leave, you glance once more toward the heart of the temple, where the sanctuaries sleep behind closed doors. Inside, the priests perform their secret rituals, but out here, the people perform theirs. Simple, heartfelt, human. One world mirrors the other. You brush your hand across the cool stone of the wall, feeling its slight grain beneath your fingertips. For a brief second, you think you feel a pulse, a faint vibration running through the stone, like a living thing. Maybe it's the echo of footsteps from 1,000 mornings. Maybe it's something else. Either way, it reminds you that faith, like stone, endures because people keep touching it, again and again, with hope. You step back into the sunlight, the warm air wrapping around you like a shawl. The courtyard fades behind you, but the hush of countless whispered prayers seems to follow, a kind of spiritual hum that lingers long after the incense has burned away. The quiet rhythm of daily devotion gradually fades as the temple prepares for something far grander. You sense it before you see it, the change in the air, the distant beat of drums, the sudden movement of people. The hush of worship transforms into a living, vibrant pulse. Today is no ordinary day. It is festival day, when the gods themselves are invited to leave their hidden chambers and see the sunlight once again. The air feels electric, though no one would use that word yet. The faint scent of incense is replaced by the thick, sweet smoke of burning myrrh and resin. Banners flutter from the temple pylons, painted in bright colors, turquoise, gold, ochre, catching the light like waves of silk. The statues of the gods are being readied for procession, carried out from the inner sanctuaries where they normally slumber. You can feel the hum of anticipation ripple through the crowd, 1,000 murmured prayers tumbling into the warm wind. You edge closer to the outer gate, where priests and attendants bustle about with a sense of reverent urgency. They move the way bees do, each knowing exactly what to do, even in the chaos. A high priest gives quiet instructions, his voice calm but commanding. The sacred bark, a beautifully crafted boat made of gilded wood, is polished to a mirror shine. It will carry the god statue through the streets and down the Nile so that all may see and celebrate. The festival could be for any number of gods. In Thebes, it might be the Apet festival for Amun-Ra, when his image travels from Karnak to Luxor Temple. In Memphis, perhaps a celebration for Ptah. Wherever you are, the essence is the same. The god leaves the sanctuary to renew the bond between the divine and the people. In a world where the gods mostly stay unseen, this day is a rare reunion. You feel a gentle nudge as a boy passes you, his arms full of lotus flowers. He's selling them to people in the crowd who want to toss them toward the bark as it passes. You buy one, a pale blue blossom just beginning to open, and tuck it behind your ear. You probably won't survive this heat, you think dryly, but at least you'll look festive doing it. A group of musicians gathers near the temple entrance. Women with hand drums, men with flutes and sistrums, the sacred rattles used in worship of Hathor. When they begin to play, the sound is hypnotic, a shimmering rhythm of bronze and reed and voice. The beat starts slow, ceremonial, and then rises with the chant of the priests. The sound fills the air until it feels like the whole courtyard vibrates. You can't help but move a little with the rhythm, the vibration tugging at your chest like a heartbeat. The gates open. A hush falls, as if the air itself is holding its breath. The priests emerge first, walking in precise formation. Behind them comes the bark, carried on the shoulders of 20 men. It glitters with gold leaf, the prow carved into the head of a falcon, the symbol of the sun's journey across the sky. Inside, under a canopy of linen, rests the shrine, the god statue hidden from direct view, but present all the same. The crowd erupts in murmured devotion, voices blending into a low hum of awe. You find yourself whispering too, though you don't even know the words. It's as though being near this procession unlocks some old instinct to bow, to hope, to connect. Around you, people kneel or raise their arms. Children wave palm fronds, and even the temple cats weave between legs, startled but curious. The procession begins to move, slow and stately. The bark sways slightly with each step, and sunlight flashes on its golden surface. The priests chant hymns that rise and fall like the tide, invoking the gods' blessings for fertile fields, calm floods, and protection from disease. Each verse is centuries old, memorized by generations of voices. As you follow along, the procession spills out onto the wide avenue lined with sphinxes. Their stone faces, part lion, part human, seem to watch silently as the god passes by. The road leads to the river, and the closer you get, the stronger the smell of the Nile becomes. Mud, reeds, water lilies, and the faint tang of fish. The combination is oddly grounding after all that incense. At the water's edge, another bark awaits, a larger one, carved like a real ship, but decorated in divine splendor. It rocks gently against its moorings, ropes creaking softly. The god statue will now take to the river, symbolizing the eternal journey of creation, the movement of Ra's solar boat across the heavens. Priests transfer the smaller shrine onto the floating bark with careful ceremony. The crowd presses closer, though the temple guards hold them back with gentle hands. Once the statue is secured, the musicians begin again, their rhythm echoing across the water. Drums thud, flutes trill, and voices rise in unison. You can feel the energy of it in your chest, a sacred joy that isn't loud but deeply steady, like the heartbeat of the land itself. As the bark drifts out onto the Nile, people toss flowers, fruits, even bits of jewelry into the water. The river becomes a mosaic of petals and light. The sun catches on the ripples, turning them to molten gold. You watch the god's vessel glide downstream, shimmering like a dream. Somewhere, a man nearby shouts a blessing. Another begins to dance, his movements wild and joyous, while a group of children splash in the shallows, pretending their clay toys are miniature barks of their own. The whole scene feels ancient and immediate at once, a communion between time, faith, and celebration. Historians still argue whether these festivals were truly religious or partly political displays, reinforcing the power of priests and pharaohs. But standing here, watching faces light up in the sun, you realize it doesn't matter much. To the people, it's both divine celebration and social heartbeat, a reminder that life, like the Nile, must keep moving. A breeze stirs, carrying the scent of incense and river water back toward the temple. The music softens, fading into the distance as the bark drifts farther downstream. For a while, no one speaks. Even the chatter of the crowd quiets, replaced by the steady lap of waves. When the bark finally vanishes around the bend, the festival shifts into its second act. The solemnity melts into laughter. Stalls appear seemingly from nowhere, selling beer and roasted duck. Jugglers and acrobats perform in the street, their movements echoing the divine procession in miniature. Children chase each other through clouds of dust. You watch it unfold, smiling. Even the gods, it seems, appreciate a good after-party. You accept a cup of cool beer from a friendly merchant, its foam catching the light. He grins and raises his own cup toward the river. "To Amun," he says. You clink cups and take a sip. The beer is thick, yeasty, slightly sour, but refreshing all the same. Egyptians brewed beer daily. It was safer than water and considered a sacred gift from the gods. It's oddly comforting to think that faith and fermentation once went hand in hand. As the sun begins to set, the priests return from the river, their steps slower now, their chants softer. They carry the shrine back into the temple, the light fading behind them. You watch as the doors close once again, sealing the god back into mystery until the next celebration. The day's color drains gently from the world, replaced by the golden dusk. You stand by the Nile a moment longer, watching lanterns float downstream, tiny lights sent out by worshippers as offerings to the river. The sight is mesmerizing. Hundreds of flickering points of flame drifting on the dark water, each carrying a wish or prayer. The river, like time itself, accepts them silently. As the last light fades, you realize how deeply this place ties joy to reverence, laughter to faith. In Egypt, worship was not about fear of divine wrath. It was about harmony, gratitude, and rhythm. The gods weren't distant kings demanding obedience. They were companions, as real and necessary as the flood that nourished the crops. You turn back toward the temple, where the final embers of incense rise into the cooling night. The crowd disperses, leaving behind footprints, petals, and echoes of song. The quiet returns, but it feels different now, warmer, fuller. You can still hear the faint echo of drums in your mind, like a heartbeat that lingers long after the festival ends. You exhale softly. For the first time in hours, the temple is still again. The gods have returned to their chambers, the people to their homes, and you to that familiar calm where devotion and sleep begin to blend together.
The air inside the embalming house is heavy and still. Even before you step across the threshold, you can smell it. A blend of resin, natron, and the faintly sweet scent of oils that never truly leave the walls. The work done here is both intimate and eternal. It is the art of preservation, the quiet, patient craft of guiding a soul from one world into the next. The Egyptians believed death was not an ending, but a continuation. The body, they thought, was a vessel the soul might need again, and so it must be cared for, protected, and made whole. The process of mummification was not merely technical. It was sacred theater, a ritual act of devotion that touched both the mortal and divine. You walk into the chamber, where shafts of light slip through narrow vents in the wall. The scene before you is deliberate and rhythmic. Several embalmers move in practiced silence around a linen-wrapped form laid upon a low table of stone. Their tools, simple blades of copper, spoons, and jars, rest neatly beside bowls of fragrant oils. The sound of slow chanting hums like bees in the background as a priest recites verses from the Book of the Dead. One of the embalmers, his head shaved and skin glistening in the heat, works with precise calm. His hands are steady, his movements graceful. He's not a physician, nor quite a priest, yet he holds both knowledge and reverence. To watch him work is to witness a balance of faith and science, intuition and discipline. He begins by cleansing the body with palm wine and water from the Nile, murmuring prayers as he pours. The washing is symbolic, purifying both the physical remains and the spirit that once lived within. Then, using a hooked instrument, he makes a small incision near the abdomen. Through this, he carefully removes the organs, each one cleaned, anointed, and placed in its own jar. You notice the jars waiting on a nearby table, beautifully carved canopic jars with lids shaped like divine heads, a falcon, a baboon, a jackal, and a man. These represent the 4 sons of Horus, protectors of the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines. Each organ is preserved with natron, the desert salt that draws out moisture and halts decay before being sealed into its jar. The heart, however, is left inside the chest. It is the seat of emotion, wisdom, and identity, the part of the soul that would later be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth. The brain, curiously, holds little significance to the Egyptians. The embalmer removes it by inserting a long metal hook through the nostrils,
breaking the thin bone behind the nose and gently stirring until the brain liquefies. It's then drained out, discarded without ceremony. You shiver at the thought, though the embalmers perform it with serene familiarity. To them, this is not gruesome work, it is sacred duty. Next comes the drying. The body is covered entirely in natron and left to rest for 70 days. The embalmers check the body daily, ensuring no moisture remains. During this time, prayers continue. The deceased is never left alone. You imagine the slow, patient passage of those days. The desert air outside hot and dry, the chamber inside filled with the silence of time stretching on. When at last the drying is complete, the body is unwrapped from its natron cocoon. It looks fragile, papery, yet intact. Now begins the process of restoration. Oils and unguments are rubbed into the skin. Cedar, myrrh, and frankincense, their scents rich and warm. The embalmers anoint each limb as if reawakening it, speaking softly as they work. They fill the body with linen and sawdust to restore its shape, sometimes even inserting small amulets between the wrappings. Each amulet carries meaning: the scarab for rebirth, the ankh for life, the eye of Horus for protection. These are not decorations, but spells, woven into the fabric of eternity. When the wrapping begins, it is done with care, bordering on love. Strips of linen are layered one over another, bound in resin to seal them. The process can take days, sometimes weeks. Priests recite the ritual of the mouth opening, touching the lips of the mummy with sacred tools to restore the senses, to allow the deceased to see, hear, speak, and breathe again in the afterlife. You find yourself breathing more slowly as you watch. There's something strangely soothing about the ritual. The repetition, the order, the rhythm of it all. Nothing is rushed. Each motion, each knot of linen is both an act of craftsmanship and a prayer. The embalmers seem to exist in another kind of time, one that moves in circles instead of lines. When at last the wrapping is complete, the face is covered with a gilded mask. The mask is not meant to hide, but to reveal the idealized image of the soul in divine form. Gold, the flesh of the gods, signifies eternity. For pharaohs, these masks are masterpieces of art. For ordinary people, they are humbler but no less meaningful, often painted wood or linen coated in plaster. Yet the intention is always the same: to honor the journey beyond. The mummy is then placed within a coffin, sometimes several, nested like shells, each painted with protective texts and symbols. On the outside, the Book of the Dead is written in hieroglyphs, a map for the spirit to follow through the dangers of the duat, the underworld. You trace the symbols with your eyes: serpents, stars, waves, and gates. Each one holds a story, a spell, a promise. You follow as the embalmers carry the coffin from the chamber into the blinding sun. The light feels shocking after so long indoors. Outside, the family of the deceased waits in silence, their faces solemn but not sorrowful. To them, this is not the end of life, but its continuation in another form. A priest dressed as Anubis, the jackal-headed god of the dead, leads the procession. His mask gleams black and gold, his steps measured and slow. Behind him, incense burns in thick spirals, the smoke curling upward like a path for the spirit to follow. The coffin is carried on a wooden sled, drawn toward the west, the direction of the setting sun, and thus the realm of the dead. The desert wind whispers softly, and you can hear the faint rattle of papyrus leaves. The journey to the tomb is both physical and spiritual. The priests chant verses describing the soul's voyage through the duat, past lakes of fire, through halls guarded by serpents, across rivers of darkness. But beyond all these lies the field of reeds, a paradise of sunlight and abundance, a mirror of sunlight itself, perfect and eternal. At last, the procession reaches the tomb. The walls inside are painted with scenes of the deceased's life, plowing fields, embracing family, offering gifts to the gods. The colors are vivid even after centuries. Blues as deep as the Nile, reds like desert clay, gold that still glows faintly in the half-light. These are not mere decorations, they are memories made eternal. The coffin is lowered into the burial chamber. Around it, offerings are placed: bread, wine, figs, amulets, and small wooden servants, shabti, that will awaken to labor in the afterlife. The priest raises his hands and recites the final blessing, his voice echoing off the stone. You can almost hear the closing words of farewell. May your soul rise with the sun. May your heart be light before the scales of truth. May your name live for millions of years. The tomb is sealed. Dust settles in the silence. Somewhere beyond the threshold, the Nile flows on, carrying the reflection of stars. Life continues as it always has. Fields to till, children to raise, prayers to whisper at dawn. But beneath the earth, another kind of life begins. For the Egyptians, immortality was not a distant dream, but a carefully constructed reality, a collaboration between gods, people, and the natural world. They didn't fear death as a void, but understood it as transformation. The body sleeps, the soul journeys, and time folds back on itself like the turning of the river. As you leave the tomb and step into the cooling dusk, you feel an unexpected calm. The desert horizon glows orange and violet, the sky vast and soft. You realize that, in a way, the Egyptians never truly died. They simply changed their address. Their names, their prayers, their careful works of stone and linen all whisper the same message. Nothing is ever lost. Everything becomes something else. You look back one last time toward the silent entrance of the tomb. The air is still, the sand smooth, the sky full of stars. Somewhere within, wrapped in quiet and resin and faith, a soul is beginning its next journey. And with that thought, you breathe out slowly. The rhythm of life, death, and rebirth feels less like mystery and more like music. A melody that never ends, only changes key. You rise before the first light touches the river. The air still carries the night's coolness, and the only sounds are the faint ripple of the Nile and the whisper of linen robes brushing against stone. Today, you follow the priests, the quiet keepers of Egypt's divine order, as they begin their morning ritual. Priests in ancient Egypt lived lives of discipline and rhythm. To serve the gods, one had to be clean, both in body and spirit. And so, before the temple doors even open, you find yourself standing by the sacred lake, a man-made pool within the temple walls, perfectly still, mirroring the stars that linger above. One by one, the priests step into the water. They move slowly, reverently, submerging themselves 3 times. The water is cool and smells faintly of lotus. They murmur soft prayers as they wash their faces, their arms, their hands, each gesture deliberate, symbolic. Purity is not merely hygiene, it is the foundation of connection to the divine. To touch the altar, to speak the God's name, one must first be reborn in cleanliness. You notice one priest shaving his head and body with a small bronze blade. Every hair must go, no place for impurity to cling. He does this every other day as part of his ritual maintenance. Even a stray whisker would be considered an offense before the gods. The Egyptians took hygiene seriously long before it became fashionable elsewhere. Soap made from natron and animal fat was a daily staple, and oils perfumed with myrrh kept the skin supple beneath the desert sun. You can't help but think how ironic it is that while the rest of the ancient world may have thought Egypt exotic, its people were basically the inventors of spa culture.
Somewhere between the prayers, oils, and scented baths, the priests achieved what modern influencers might call self-care, but make it sacred. After the washing, they dress in fresh white linen, always white, symbolizing purity. The fabric rustles softly as they tie it around their waists. A few apply kohl to their eyes, not for vanity, but protection. The dark line shields against glare and insects, and, perhaps, against the gaze of evil spirits. As the sun begins to rise, its light paints the temple walls gold. You follow the priests toward the inner sanctuary. Before they enter, they stop once more to offer incense, bowing deeply before the doorway. The high priest steps forward first, carrying a small brazier. The smoke curls upward like an invisible rope connecting earth and heaven. Inside the temple, the air is cool and shadowed. The thick stone walls hold in a chill that feels almost like secrecy. The priests move with practiced precision, each step measured, each motion part of a rhythm older than memory. The first task of the day, awaken the god. To the Egyptians, the statue of a god was not a symbol. It was the god, a living, breathing embodiment of divine presence. But even divinity, it seems, enjoyed a little morning ritual. The high priest approaches the inner shrine, which remains hidden behind doors closed since sunset. With hands trembling slightly, he opens them. Within the shrine stands the image of the god, carved in stone and inlaid with gold and lapis lazuli. The priest bows low and begins to speak softly. "I awake you, great one, who rests in silence. I give you breath for another day." He removes the linen wrappings that covered the statue overnight, as if unwrapping a sleeper from a blanket. Then he bathes the statue with water, anoints it with oil, and dresses it in fresh linen robes. Jewelry follows: necklaces, rings, a crown. Finally, he offers food: bread, meat, fruit, and wine. The god, of course, does not physically eat, but the act of offering transfers the food's essence to the divine. Once the god has been nourished, the food becomes heka, charged with spiritual power, and will later be shared among the priests. Historians still argue whether this daily feeding of the gods was strictly symbolic, or whether the priests truly believed the statues absorbed the food's spirit. Either way, you find the ritual strangely comforting. The act of care, washing, dressing, feeding feels intimate, like tending to a beloved elder or an honored guest. You notice how quiet it is here. Outside, the city of Thebes might already be stirring, merchants shouting, donkeys braying, children laughing. But inside these walls, time seems to stand still. The only sounds are the low murmur of chants and the faint hiss of incense. As the ceremony continues, another priest fans away flies with a strip of palm frond, ensuring that no impurity disturbs the divine space. A third sprinkles natron water along the floor, purifying the area. The work is repetitive, methodical, almost hypnotic. At one point, the high priest pauses, raising his hand toward the ceiling. His voice deepens as he invokes Ma'at, the goddess of truth and cosmic order. Everything the Egyptians did in their temples was about maintaining balance between life and death, chaos and harmony, human and divine. Without Ma'at, the sun would not rise, the Nile would not flood, and life itself would crumble into disorder. You can sense the weight of that belief in every movement. Each gesture, each word is an offering to keep the universe steady for one more day. Then the chanting slows. The priest extinguishes the incense and closes the shrine doors once again. The god has been tended to, and the world can continue turning. Afterward, the priests leave the inner chamber to attend to other duties: record-keeping, managing temple estates, instructing novices, and overseeing ritual calendar dates. The temple is not only a house of worship, but a vast institution, part spiritual center, part economic powerhouse.
Temples owned farmland, employed scribes, and managed trade in grain, linen, and perfume. You follow one priest through a courtyard where scribes sit cross-legged with papyrus scrolls. They record offerings, track laborers' rations, and calculate temple revenue. The sound of reeds scratching against parchment mixes with the cooing of pigeons on the roof. It's a reminder that faith and bureaucracy have always gone hand in hand. Later, the priest returns to the sacred lake to bathe again before his midday meal. Purity must be renewed constantly. He eats simply, bread, figs, and beer, and then rests in the shade for a short while. In the afternoon, there are more prayers, more incense, more recitations from sacred texts. It strikes you how cyclical their lives are. Every action, sleep, wash, pray, eat, record, pray again, is part of an unbroken loop. And yet, within that loop, there's peace. Repetition becomes meditation. Purpose hums quietly beneath routine. One of the younger priests, perhaps new to the temple, looks nervous as he prepares offerings. His hands tremble slightly as he pours oil into a small lamp. The older priest beside him whispers something encouraging, and they share a brief human smile. Even in the shadow of gods, a little kindness remains. You watch as evening begins to fall. The final prayers are recited. The god's shrine is closed once more for the night. The priests extinguish the lamps one by one, leaving only the faintest glow from the central brazier. The scent of incense still lingers, sweet, smoky, timeless. As the doors to the temple are sealed until morning, you can almost hear the world exhale. The sun dips low over the Nile, painting the water in shades of bronze and rose. The priests retire to their quarters, silent and serene. Their day has been long, but every act, every washing, every whisper, every flicker of flame has been a thread in the fabric of eternity. And as you step outside, into the cool breath of dusk, you understand something subtle but profound. The Egyptians didn't simply worship their gods, they collaborated with them. Their rituals weren't about fear or submission, but about partnership, a daily act of keeping existence itself in harmony. It's a beautiful thought, really. The universe as a temple, endlessly tended by invisible priests, sweeping away chaos, polishing the stars, and lighting incense for the dawn. And somewhere in that quiet, you realize even your own breath feels like part of the ritual. The temple courtyard hums softly with life as you step into it again, this time focusing not on the priests or the grand festivals, but on the quiet, intimate acts of devotion that fill the hours between grand ceremonies. Offerings, small, personal, and meaningful, are everywhere. The air is scented with incense, but also with bread, fruit, and the faint earthy aroma of lotus flowers. Each object, each gesture is a language in itself, a wordless conversation with the divine. You wander past a low altar where a farmer has placed a tiny loaf of barley bread, a bowl of honey, and a small jug of beer. He murmurs softly, not for the ears of anyone else, but for the eyes of Hathor, the goddess of love and joy. You notice that he leaves a few seeds beside the offerings. Perhaps they are symbolic, perhaps practical. Either way, it feels like a quiet hope for life and growth, for a harvest that will feed both body and soul. Small statues of the gods stand along the walls, each marked with a different symbol. The Ankh, representing life, gleams faintly in the early morning sun. The scarab, symbol of rebirth and renewal, sits next to a tiny offering bowl. The Eye of Horus, painted on a slab of limestone, watches silently. You reach out to touch one, but hesitate. Superstition and respect war gently in your mind. Instead, you close your eyes and feel the textures, imagining the countless hands that have traced these symbols over millennia. Nearby, a woman kneels beside a statue of Bes, the dwarf god who protects households and children. She places a small figurine at his feet, whispering prayers that no one can hear except the deity he represents.
Bes was both playful and protective, a reminder that magic and mischief often coexist. Egyptians liked their gods approachable, even relatable. You might not find humor in every pantheon, but Bes could make you smile, or at least feel safe while sleeping. The offerings aren't always physical. A boy has written a simple prayer on a piece of papyrus, rolled it carefully, and tied it with a strip of linen. He places it into a small hollow in the wall. His words ask for strength, for protection, for a little luck in the coming days. Historians still argue whether these written prayers were intended to be read by the gods themselves or functioned more as personal reminders of devotion. Either way, you sense the sincerity behind the gesture, a kind of quiet magic that doesn't require recognition. You notice the rhythmic flicker of lamps along the temple walls. Some are dedicated to specific deities, and the oil burned in them is often perfumed with frankincense, myrrh, or cassia. Lighting a lamp is both practical and symbolic. A source of illumination, yes, but also a beacon of intention. The flame carries the prayer upward, a little bridge of light connecting mortal and divine. In the corners of the courtyard, children play with clay animals, cats, crocodiles, ducks, all miniature offerings of their own. You smile at the thought that even play can be devotional. Every action, if intended with respect, can carry spiritual weight. Even a mislaid toy could serve as a charm. Egyptians believed the ordinary world was suffused with sacred presence. Their homes, fields, and tools all held the potential for connection with the gods. You pass a small altar devoted to Thoth, god of wisdom and writing. On it rests a quill, a jar of ink, and a piece of papyrus with neat hieroglyphs. A young scribe practices copying spells and hymns, his lips moving silently as he shapes the words. Each mark is a prayer in itself, a repetition intended to ensure memory, knowledge, and divine favor. Writing was an act of devotion, a way to keep the gods present in everyday life. Even small, imperfect scribbles could hold immense spiritual power if done with sincerity. The courtyard is dotted with small pools of water, reflecting the morning sun. People dip their fingers in, touching their lips or sprinkling themselves lightly. Water is sacred, a symbol of life and renewal. Even the smallest act, washing hands before an offering, carries significance. You dip your hand into one of the pools, feeling the coolness seep into your skin, as though the temple itself breathes through the water. You notice a tiny amulet lying forgotten on a ledge, a scarab carved from carnelian. You pick it up and examine it. Scarabs were symbols of regeneration, rolling the sun across the sky like a divine dung beetle, as Egyptians imagined. You chuckle quietly at the thought of celestial insects powering the universe, and the humor, subtle but present, eases the solemnity of the temple. There's something reassuring in that. Belief need not be grim to be serious. Nearby, a group of women arranges small bundles of flowers around a statue of Isis. Their movement is careful, almost choreographed, a silent dance of devotion. Some flowers are fresh, others have begun to wilt. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians believed the freshness of offerings affected the gods' favor, or whether the act itself was what mattered most. Either way, there is beauty in imperfection, a recognition that effort, not perfection, defines devotion. You wander toward a small alcove where a man offers a bit of honey to the god Min, god of fertility and strength. He whispers a hope for children and fields alike, placing a handful of the sticky sweetness into a bowl. The aroma is thick, warm, and comforting. It strikes you that scent is a kind of language, one that speaks directly to memory and emotion, connecting worshippers to both gods and ancestors. Around the temple walls, you notice countless tiny carvings, hands, eyes, stars, spirals. People have left them for centuries, marking moments of devotion, petition, or gratitude. Some are deep and deliberate, others are shallow scratches, almost accidental. Yet all of them speak the same silent truth. Someone was here.
Someone cared. Someone believed. The courtyard begins to fill with soft chatter as visitors arrive for mid-morning offerings. You watch as a mother brings a small loaf of bread for her sick child, whispering prayers to Sekhmet, lioness goddess of healing. She sprinkles a little wine on the offering, anointing it with a touch of oil. Her gestures are delicate, practiced, yet tender. This is everyday magic, the uncelebrated, continuous devotion that threads life and eternity together. You pause to consider the rhythm of it all. There are no grand ceremonies here, no parades, no river processions. Just the quiet accumulation of gestures, each small, each significant. Over time, these acts form a tapestry of faith, a living network connecting humans and gods, city and river, stone and sky. It's striking how personal and yet communal this devotion is. Each person acts for themselves and for their community, offering the very best they can spare. A loaf of bread might be tiny, a flower wilting, a whisper lost in the wind. But together, these acts form a chorus that resonates throughout the temple. You imagine the invisible threads connecting all of these actions. The flicker of a lamp here, the placement of a flower there, the scratch of a stylus across papyrus, all intertwining like constellations in the sky. In this web, the divine feels present, intimate, approachable. It's a daily conversation rather than a distant decree, and you realize that this quiet magic sustains more than faith. It sustains the rhythm of life itself. The sun rises higher, and the courtyard begins to hum with the gentle activity of the day. You take a final deep breath, absorbing the smells, the colors, the small miracles happening all around. The temple is alive, not with spectacle, but with devotion. The patient, steady acts of ordinary people seeking connection with something greater than themselves. You step back from the altars, feeling an unexpected lightness. The world outside may be chaotic, noisy, unpredictable, but here, in this courtyard, rhythm and care create their own kind of eternity. And maybe, you think quietly, that's the most sacred magic of all. As the sun dips low behind the desert hills, the temple begins to change once again. The heat of the day softens, and shadows stretch across the sandstone columns. You find yourself lingering near the outer gates, watching as people depart. Children tugging at their mothers' skirts, merchants packing away wares, priests moving quietly to their quarters. The courtyard empties, leaving behind a kind of hushed expectancy. Night is coming, and with it, a different kind of devotion. You notice the first lanterns being lit. Their flickering light casts long, wavering shadows across the walls, revealing details missed in daylight. Tiny hieroglyphs carved along the bases of columns, faint patterns etched into the stone floors, subtle discolorations marking centuries of touch. Each lantern seems to breathe life into the temple, small flames dancing like attentive spirits. The priests emerge from their quarters, walking softly along the stone pathways. Their white linen robes glow faintly in the lantern light, almost spectral. Night in the temple is not merely a pause in ritual. It is another kind of ceremony entirely. The gods, although housed in their inner sanctums, are believed to remain active during these hours. The priests move as though under their gaze, careful with every sound, every gesture. You follow a group of them toward the sacred lake. The water, now reflecting the first stars, appears almost black, yet it mirrors the heavens with startling clarity. One priest lowers his hand, tracing ripples into the surface. The act is delicate, almost reverent. Water as a medium between worlds, a conduit for prayer and purification. He murmurs words meant to keep the chaos of night at bay, to maintain Ma'at, the divine order that underpins existence. A few worshippers linger quietly in the shadows, performing their own small acts of devotion.
One elderly man arranges a row of tiny lamps along the base of a column, offering light to Thoth, god of wisdom. A young woman leaves a handful of lotus petals at the foot of a statue of Isis, the scent faint but potent in the cool evening air. Even in the absence of daylight, devotion finds a way to assert itself, delicate and persistent. You walk past a shrine where a priest is quietly reciting from a scroll. The voice is low, almost indistinguishable from the gentle rustling of night winds. The scroll's words are spells meant to guide the deceased safely through the duat, the Egyptian underworld, during their nocturnal journey. It's a ritual of care, a protective act, not for the living, but for those already departed. You shiver slightly, not out of fear, but from a sense of awe at the continuity of care that stretches across the realms of life and death. As you pause near the central sanctuary, the large doors swing open slightly, and a soft glow spills out. Inside, the high priest moves carefully around the statue of the god, adjusting the robes and checking the offerings left throughout the day. Even in darkness, nothing is neglected. Each act is deliberate, as if to reassure the deity that the order of the world remains intact. You realize that the temple at night is like the heartbeat of the city itself, quiet, steady, reliable. You notice one curious detail. The priests sprinkle a fine powder around the inner sanctum. It smells faintly sweet, with hints of myrrh and frankincense, but there is a subtle sharpness too, almost medicinal. This natron mixture serves multiple purposes: purification, protection, and perhaps even a kind of symbolic ward against spiritual impurities. Historians still argue whether the sprinkling was more for ritualistic effect or practical sanitation, but in either case, the act seems to harmonize the space, imbuing it with a sense of vigilance and calm. Outside, the first stars begin to emerge in the deepening indigo sky. Orion rises over the horizon, and you can't help but notice the alignment of some temple walls with particular celestial bodies. The Egyptians believed the heavens reflected divine order, and that the stars themselves carried messages of protection, guidance, and cosmic rhythm. A faint breeze carries the scent of desert dust and distant reeds from the Nile, a reminder that life continues beyond the sacred walls. You walk along the periphery of the temple, pausing at small altars where visitors have left lanterns, bowls of water, or incense sticks. Each object holds intention, prayers for safety, for health, for clarity in the coming day. The courtyard feels alive in a hushed, meditative way, a stark contrast to the midday bustle. You notice a cat slipping silently between the shadows, its eyes reflecting the lantern's glow. Cats were considered sacred, guardians of the home and temple alike. Even in darkness, their presence reassures that order persists. In a corner, you find a young acolyte practicing the reading of hieroglyphs by lantern light. The flickering illumination casts long, shifting shadows across the papyrus, making each symbol appear as if it were moving. You recognize a few: the Ankh for life, the Jed for stability, the Eye of Horus for protection. He recites the spells slowly, deliberately, not rushing, as if the rhythm of speech itself maintains balance. A few meters away, a priest arranges tiny bowls of honey, oil, and water along the threshold of a shrine. These are small, practical offerings, but their symbolism is powerful. Sustenance, nourishment, and purification all presented together. It occurs to you that the Egyptians understood the night as a time to reinforce harmony, a quiet rehearsal of cosmic order before the city awakens once again. The deeper you move into the temple complex, the more meditative the atmosphere becomes. The high priest lights a central lamp, and you notice the shadows dancing across the walls. The flickering glow brings hieroglyphs to life, their carved lines seemingly moving in rhythm with the flame. You remember the daytime bustle, the offerings, the festivals. But here, in night's embrace, devotion is intimate,
internal, quiet.
A small bell rings somewhere down a corridor, its tone low and resonant. It signals the start of a silent vigil, a period of reflection and prayer. You see figures kneeling, heads bowed, hands folded. Even without sound, the energy of devotion is palpable. The temple breathes with these acts, like a living organism maintaining itself through cycles of attention and care. You notice a subtle repetition in all these rituals: wash, anoint, offer, chant, repeated endlessly, like the turning of the Nile itself. It is rhythmic, hypnotic, and strangely comforting. Even the faintly playful elements, the cat, the flicker of lanterns, the whispering acolyte, create a balance of order and life, echoing the Egyptians' understanding of Ma'at.
Historians still argue whether nightly rituals were as important as daytime offerings, or if they primarily reinforced the temple's social hierarchy. Yet standing here, enveloped by shadow, light, and incense, you realize the distinction feels irrelevant. The night is as sacred as the day, each act a thread in the continuity of devotion.
As you pause in the courtyard one last time, the stars bright overhead and lanterns glowing faintly below, a sense of calm settles over you. The temple is a sanctuary not only for gods, but for the human spirit, a place where ritual, care, and quiet attention maintain a fragile balance. Even as you prepare to leave, you feel the lingering rhythm of the temple's heart, steady and enduring, like the pulse of eternity itself. The next morning, you wake to a softer light spilling across the temple complex, the sun just beginning to cast long golden shadows over the stone walls. But today, your path takes you to a quieter, more fragrant part of the temple, the sacred gardens. These are spaces of calm reflection, living offerings to the gods, and repositories of sensory devotion that engage sight, smell, and touch in equal measure. You step barefoot onto the cool, damp earth, feeling the difference immediately. The stones of the courtyard are replaced by soft soil and carefully raked pathways. These gardens were not merely decorative. Every plant, every water channel, every stone had purpose. Lotus flowers bloom in shallow pools, their pale blue petals nodding lazily in the morning breeze. Papyrus stalks sway along small channels of running water, reminding you subtly of the Nile itself. The Egyptians believed that cultivating plants in a sacred context mirrored the cultivation of the soul. Tending a lotus was a prayer, pruning a papyrus was an act of devotion, and watching the gentle rise of water through the irrigation channels was a meditation on life's continuity. You follow a narrow path lined with small statues of deities, each holding a plant or fruit in symbolic gesture. Bes, the dwarf god, appears again among the flowers, grinning with his eternal mischief. A tiny offering of milk and bread sits at his feet. Nearby, a statue of Hathor gazes serenely at the garden, her ears adorned with lotus garlands. You notice how carefully the flowers are arranged. Colors chosen for harmony, height for visual balance, scent for olfactory impact. Even in seemingly random beauty, there is meticulous design. Water flows gently from small stone spouts into shallow pools. The sound is soft, almost hypnotic, a natural accompaniment to the distant chants echoing from the main temple. Egyptians believed water could purify the body and spirit, and in temple gardens it carries a dual role: practical irrigation and symbolic nourishment for the gods. You cup some water in your hands, feeling its coolness seep into your skin. You flick it lightly onto a small offering of bread set for Osiris, imagining that this act of care reaches the divine just as surely as if it were spoken aloud. The gardens are not quiet in the sense of emptiness. Birds flit between papyrus and lotus, their calls punctuating the soft rustle of leaves. Butterflies drift over the pools, their delicate wings catching the sunlight. Priests move among the plants, checking water levels, pruning flowers, and offering small gestures to the gods. Some recite short hymns, their voices low and measured, blending with the natural sounds of the garden in a harmonious tapestry. You pause near a bed of jasmine, inhaling its heady fragrance. Egyptians associated scent with spiritual potency. Myrrh and frankincense were valuable, yes, but even the simplest flower carried meaning. Historians still argue whether certain garden layouts were purely aesthetic or intentionally symbolic. Rows and shapes reflecting constellations, deities, or moral ideals. Standing here, among blossoms and the gentle trickle of water, you sense that the answer is both. Beauty and devotion, intertwined. Along a shaded path, small altars hold offerings of fruit, bread, and miniature clay animals. You notice children quietly placing little bowls of honey beside the lotus pools, learning from parents that everyday acts, however small, carry spiritual weight. The Egyptians seem to understand instinctively that devotion does not always require grand gestures. Sometimes, the simple act of tending to life itself, watering a plant, arranging a bloom, setting an offering, was enough. You move to a quiet corner, where a fig tree spreads its branches over a small stone bench. A priest sits there, carefully anointing a tiny statue with oil, whispering soft prayers to Thoth. You watch, captivated, as the sunlight catches the droplets of oil, scattering tiny rainbows across the leaves. Even in such mundane motions, there is a sense of sacred rhythm. Every action deliberate, measured, respectful. In the distance, you hear the faint tinkling of a sistrum, a ritual rattle, signaling that worship in the inner temple is ongoing. Yet the garden feels separate from the hustle and bustle, a place where gods, humans, and nature coexist in quiet equilibrium. Lotus, papyrus, fig, and date trees are cultivated not only for offerings, but to create an environment of meditation. The fragrance, colors, and sounds were all designed to elevate consciousness and bring worshipers closer to divine presence. You notice how the plants themselves seem to respond to attention. Leaves glisten from dew or from water splashed in ritual. Petals open more fully under soft sunlight. There is a subtle lesson here. Life, like devotion, thrives when cared for gently and consistently. The garden is both metaphor and practice, a living example of balance and patience. Some offerings are more unusual. A priest places small carved stones shaped like scarabs among the plants, and another arranges tiny figurines of crocodiles and fish. These represent gods, spirits, and protective forces. Quirky as it may seem, this blending of life, symbol, and imagination was a hallmark of Egyptian spirituality. You smile, recalling the miniature clay cats in yesterday's courtyard, proof that even play could be sacred if performed with intent. You wander toward the central water pool, where lotus flowers float like delicate stars. A priest leans over, scattering petals into the water while chanting. The flowers drift slowly, carried by invisible currents, their movement mesmerizing. You crouch, dipping your hand into the pool to feel the chill against your skin, and you notice the interplay of light, shadow, and reflection. For a moment, it feels as if the water itself is alive, a silent mirror to the divine. Historians still debate the extent to which these gardens were practical versus symbolic. Some argue they served as cool, shaded retreats in a hot climate. Others insist that every plant, every layout, every water channel was imbued with religious meaning. Standing here, you realize it doesn't matter. Both are true. The gardens nourish body, mind, and spirit, weaving daily life into the continuous fabric of devotion. As the sun climbs higher, casting warmer light across the paths, you take a slow walk along the garden's outer edge. Bees buzz lazily among the flowers, birds flit between papyrus stalks, and the soft murmur of temple activity drifts faintly from the inner halls. Every sensory detail, scent, sound, color, touch, feels like an offering in itself, a small tribute to the balance and beauty that the Egyptians sought in both the visible and invisible world. Before leaving the garden, you pause to take in the scene. Lotus pools reflecting the sky, fig and date trees casting patterned shadows, priests tending small offerings, children learning devotion through play, and the subtle hum of life in every corner. This is a space where time slows, where intention and care are tangible, and where the ordinary and the sacred blend seamlessly. And as you step back toward the stone pathways of the main temple, you carry a lingering sense of quiet joy. The fragrance of the garden, the gentle rustle of leaves, the soft lapping of water, it all feels like a secret the Egyptians left behind, a whispered promise that devotion, when expressed through care and attention, is itself a path to eternity. The early morning air is already warm as you return to the temple complex, but today the atmosphere is different. There's a subtle anticipation in the scent of incense and the hum of temple servants moving about. You realize today is not like other days. Today is a festival day. Even in ancient Egypt, festivals were not always loud or chaotic. They were measured, deliberate, rhythmic, and full of purpose. Yet the air itself seems to hum with expectation, like a quiet string vibrating just beneath the surface. You follow the priests as they begin preparations for a procession. Unlike the intimate rituals you have observed before, this is communal, involving musicians, dancers, temple staff, and worshippers from nearby households. The path to the river is lined with small altars and offerings, each placed carefully along the stone and sand to honor the gods as the procession passes. You notice children holding small sistrums, shaking them gently, learning early that music itself carries divine significance. The priests emerge in their ceremonial robes, longer and more elaborately pleated than usual, adorned with gold trim and amulets. Some wear crowns shaped like lotus blooms, symbolizing creation and rebirth. Their movements are deliberate but flowing, a kind of choreography that seems to have been refined over centuries. You can't help but marvel at how structured these rituals are. Nothing is left to chance. The procession begins quietly. Priests lead the way, carrying sacred objects, small statues of gods, bowls of offerings, and ceremonial wands. Behind them follow musicians, playing flutes, drums, and the soft, mesmerizing rattle of sistrums. The sound fills the air in waves, low and rhythmic, blending with the rustle of robes and sandals on stone. The music is not just entertainment, it is part of the ritual, believed to awaken the gods' presence and please their senses. You tap your foot unconsciously, caught up in the hypnotic cadence. Worshippers line the pathway, some holding torches, others bearing small offerings. Their faces are calm and attentive, reflecting a reverence that feels almost meditative. Children mimic the movements of priests, learning through observation and imitation that devotion has both structure and freedom. Even the mundane acts, walking, standing, placing an offering, become ritualized, folded seamlessly into a larger, sacred narrative. The procession pauses at key points along the route. At each station, priests chant softly, sprinkling water and incense while reciting prayers. The god statues are presented to the people, allowing worshippers to see, touch, or offer gifts. Some sprinkle grains of barley or small amounts of wine onto the altars, believing these gestures nourish the divine in both symbolic and spiritual ways. You notice the careful repetition. Every pause, every sprinkle, every chant is repeated with precision, reinforcing rhythm, continuity, and cosmic balance. Historians still argue about the origins of certain festival rituals. Were they meant primarily to appease the gods, or were they social mechanisms to unify communities and reinforce temple authority? Standing in the middle of the procession, surrounded by music, incense, and offerings, you realize that it's both. Ritual serves the divine and human realms simultaneously, and the beauty lies in how effortlessly they intertwine. The musicians play steadily, their instruments not just audible, but felt. Drums create deep, resonant vibrations that seem to move through the ground itself. Flutes carry airy melodies that rise above, intertwining with the sistrum's metallic rattle. You can almost see the air bending in the rhythm, the temple's walls vibrating in sympathy, as if the very stones are participating in the devotion. As the procession moves closer to the Nile, the priests pause again. The river is wide and shimmering, reflecting the rising sun in a dance of gold and blue. A small barge waits, adorned with flowers and carrying a central deity statue. This is the highlight of the festival, the ritual journey of the god along the river, connecting heaven, temple, and community. You feel a quiet thrill, witnessing a ceremony that has been performed for centuries, unchanged in its rhythm, yet alive in every repetition. You notice small details that make the festival intimate despite its scale. A woman has placed a tiny loaf of bread on the temple steps as a personal offering. A child holds a figurine of a cat, quietly presenting it to a statue of Bastet. Priests nod in recognition but do not disturb these private gestures. It strikes you that personal devotion and public ritual exist side by side, complementary rather than competing. Along the riverbank, dancers begin moving in slow, flowing patterns, imitating the movement of lotus blossoms, reeds, and water currents. Their robes ripple and sway, creating a living tapestry of motion. You see the play of light and shadow as the dancers turn, the sun glinting off gold trim and painted masks. The choreography is precise, yet the performance feels alive and organic. Every step is part of a story, every gesture a prayer. The barge carrying the deity slowly glides along the river, accompanied by rhythmic drumming and chanting. Offerings are sprinkled into the water as it passes, meant to nourish the god and sustain the balance of the Nile itself. You notice how every action mirrors natural and cosmic rhythms: river flow, sun movement, celestial patterns, and agricultural cycles. The Egyptians understood ritual as a way to align human life with cosmic order. You pause to watch a priest scatter incense into the river's gentle current. The smoke rises, curling into the sky like invisible threads connecting earth and heaven. You imagine the scent traveling across fields and villages, touching the homes of worshippers far from the temple, binding community and cosmos in a single moment. Historians still debate how literal the Egyptians' belief in the divine sensory experience was, but standing here, you feel it viscerally. The smell, the sound, the motion all contributing to an almost tangible spiritual presence. The festival continues through the morning, a seamless weave of chant, music, dance, and offering. Each participant, from priest to child, contributes to a living, breathing ritual that both honors the gods and reinforces human harmony. You are struck by how these ceremonies, while elaborate, are never overwhelming. They are immersive yet gentle, complex yet calming, a reminder that devotion can be both structured and joyous. As the barge returns to the temple, the final rituals are performed. The deity is once again placed in its inner sanctum. Offerings are stored or consumed, and music fades into soft echoes. You linger a moment longer, letting the rhythm of drums, flutes, and sistrums imprint itself in your memory. Even as the festival ends, the sense of continuity, the ongoing dialogue between human and divine, remains palpable. You step back into the quiet courtyard, now empty but for the gentle flicker of lanterns. The festival may be over, but its energy lingers, a subtle hum that resonates in stone, water, and heart. The Egyptians understood that celebration is not just spectacle. It is repetition, intention, and rhythm, a way to remind both gods and humans that life, order, and devotion are inseparable. As the morning sun fully warms the temple walls, you breathe deeply, absorbing the lingering scents of incense, flowers, and river water. The music, once audible, is now only an echo in memory, yet its cadence remains within you, a gentle heartbeat. You realize that the true beauty of these festivals is not in grand displays, but in the seamless integration of sensory, spiritual, and communal devotion. And with that understanding, you feel a subtle calm settle over you, the kind that comes from witnessing a culture where life, ritual, and eternity are woven together in every gesture, every note, and every ripple of water. After the lingering rhythms of festivals and processions, you find yourself drawn toward a quieter, less obvious part of the temple, the repository of sacred knowledge. Not all devotion in ancient Egypt involved incense, water, or music. Some took place in silence, behind thick stone walls, among scrolls, papyrus rolls, and carefully carved inscriptions. These spaces, often tucked away in temple corners or upper chambers, hold the intellectual pulse of ritual life, a place where words themselves are offerings. You follow a priest into a small, dimly lit room. The air is cooler here, dry and slightly sweet from centuries of preserved papyrus. Scrolls are stacked on low shelves, some tied neatly with linen strips, others resting in clay jars to protect them from moisture. You notice the deliberate order, texts organized by deity, by type of ritual, and by season. This is a library, but also a sanctuary, a place where knowledge itself becomes sacred. One priest unrolls a papyrus, revealing intricate hieroglyphs accompanied by small illustrations. These are ritual instructions, hymns, and incantations, each word chosen carefully to honor the gods. He reads silently, lips moving, eyes tracing the lines with reverent precision. The act of reading is itself a form of devotion. Every word carries power. Scholars still argue whether the potency of these texts was inherent in the language or in the intent of the reader. But either way, the practice reflects deep respect for the written word. You notice peculiar talismans tucked between scrolls, tiny figures of baboons, scarabs, and snakes. These are not merely decorative. They function as protective charms, ensuring that knowledge remains safe and potent. Ancient Egyptians often blended practical, symbolic, and magical considerations seamlessly. Even a minor scribal error could require ritual correction, a reminder that precision mattered not just for accuracy, but for maintaining divine harmony. A young scribe sits cross-legged on the floor, practicing glyphs on fresh papyrus. His strokes are slow, deliberate, echoing the rhythms of earlier rituals. You realize that education here is a form of devotion. Copying a text isn't just literacy, it is participation in a sacred continuum. Each generation of scribes preserves the wisdom of the past while adding subtle nuances of interpretation, creating a living chain of connection to both gods and ancestors. You glance around the room and notice the layered sensory environment. The scent of papyrus mingles with faint traces of incense burned in the inner temple. Sunlight filters through small lattice windows, casting geometric shadows that move with the day. Even the sounds, the scratch of stylus on papyrus, the occasional shuffle of a robe, feel deliberate, part of a rhythm that mirrors the cadence of prayers and offerings elsewhere in the temple. Some scrolls contain practical information, calendars, grain measurements, temple inventories. Others are purely spiritual, hymns, magic spells, lists of deities, and instructions for the care of the divine statues. Every piece, large or small, contributes to the temple's function. Historians still argue about the proportion of practical versus purely religious texts, but standing here, you sense that such distinctions might be artificial. In ancient Egypt, knowledge, devotion, and daily life were inseparable. You notice one curious text, written in a slightly unusual script. Its purpose is obscure, perhaps intentionally so. Some scholars suggest it records esoteric rituals reserved for high priests, secrets meant to maintain hierarchical control. Others argue it's simply a record of older practices, preserved for posterity. You smile at the mystery. Some things, it seems, were meant to remain elusive, a reminder that not all sacred knowledge was meant for every eye.
A small shelf holds instructional texts for novices, diagrams of temple layouts, lists of ritual steps, and guides to correct pronunciation. Mispronunciation was believed to compromise the efficacy of a spell, so precision was crucial. You imagine the nervous excitement of a novice priest practicing glyphs by lantern light, aware that even the smallest error could disturb the delicate rhythm of divine service.
On another table, a priest carefully lays out illustrations of gods and symbolic motifs. These images are more than decorative, they are didactic, teaching observers the relationships among deities, the symbolic meanings of offerings, and the alignment of celestial cycles with temple rituals. You find yourself tracing the lines with your finger, imagining centuries of worshippers doing the same. Even the act of looking becomes a kind of silent participation, a subtle offering of attention and respect. In the far corner, a few scrolls are sealed, reserved for the high priest. These likely contain the most secret rites and prayers. You sense the gravity of their presence, the quiet authority they hold. The room is filled with layers of history, devotion, and intention, like a river flowing in slow, deliberate currents, unseen but powerful. Even the mundane aspects of this space are sacred. Dust is swept carefully, papyrus is stored to avoid moisture, lamps are tended, and hands are washed before touching any scroll. Purity is required not only for rituals in the outer temple, but also for engagement with knowledge itself. Ancient Egyptians understood that the written word could carry power, and that power could be disrupted by neglect, carelessness, or impurity. You leave the library area slowly, feeling a sense of reverence that persists long after stepping back into the open temple courtyard. Knowledge, you realize, is another form of offering, quiet, patient, and enduring. Every scroll, every glyph, every carefully stored text is a bridge between human intention and divine order, just as offerings, gardens, and music are. Historians still argue about how widely accessible these texts were, and whether the secrecy surrounding certain knowledge reinforced power structures more than devotion. Yet as you walk past the many altar, absorbing the morning light, you feel that the true value lies in continuity, the slow, deliberate preservation of wisdom across generations. This is devotion expressed through study, repetition, and care, and it complements the more visible acts of worship you've observed throughout the temple. And as you step back into the open air, the fragrance of incense and the soft rustle of palm leaves remind you that devotion in ancient Egypt was multifaceted: physical, sensory, intellectual, and spiritual. The temple is not merely a building, nor its rituals only acts of spectacle. They are living, breathing systems of care, rhythm, and continuity. Knowledge is sacred, and in preserving it, the Egyptians preserved the very heart of their culture. The day has begun to soften into evening, and the temple's rhythm shifts once again. You wander toward a quiet corner of the complex, where the grandeur of ceremonies, music, and festivals fades into the softer cadence of private devotion. Here, there are no crowds, no formal processions, only the intimate gestures of individuals seeking a connection with the divine that is personal, reflective, and slow. It's a space where you can almost hear the heartbeat of devotion itself, steady and calm, threading together stone, air, and human intention. You notice an elderly woman kneeling on a woven mat, her hands folded in silent prayer before a small statue of Bastet. A tiny bowl of milk sits before the figurine, a modest offering, yet it carries profound significance. You realize that devotion does not require spectacle. Sometimes the simplest gestures resonate the most. Even the flicker of a single candle can be enough to bridge the human and divine worlds. Her lips move slightly, whispering words that may be centuries old, prayers passed down orally through generations. Historians still argue whether such personal prayers were meant for the gods themselves or served primarily as a reflection of the worshipper's inner life, but either interpretation seems to hold weight. Nearby, a young man arranges small clay figurines around a lotus-shaped altar. The figures represent protective deities, each positioned with care to guard his household and family. He hums a soft tune, almost inaudible, a quiet rhythm that blends with the distant flow of the Nile and the rustling of the temple's outer trees. The music is personal, a meditation in motion, yet it mirrors the larger, more public rituals that have unfolded earlier. You think of it as a private echo of the grand ceremonies, a reminder that devotion exists both in collective spectacle and individual practice. A priest passes by, offering a small sprinkling of water and incense to the individuals in the courtyard. The gesture is unobtrusive, respectful, and almost tender. Even in the presence of sacred authority, personal devotion retains its intimacy. You realize that the Egyptians had a nuanced understanding of worship. It could be public or private, structured or spontaneous, grand or subtle, yet each form contributed to the temple's living harmony. You pause near a small fountain, where children are quietly tossing grains into the water. Their laughter is soft, almost reverent, as they participate in a ritual that is both playful and sacred. Offering even a handful of barley is an act of care, a message sent to the gods and to their own future selves. It's a gentle reminder that devotion does not always demand solemnity. Joy, attention, and intention are equally powerful. Around the courtyard, small altars glow in the fading light. Bowls of fruit, miniature statues, candles, and flowers form a mosaic of human care. You notice a scribe carefully placing a final line of hieroglyphs on a papyrus, closing a day of study with devotion, attention, and precision. Writing, like offering, like music or motion, is a way to maintain connection with the divine. Every action, however ordinary, becomes a thread in a web that stretches across time and space, linking human intention with the eternal. Historians still debate how much of private devotion was influenced by formal temple authority versus individual creativity. Observing this courtyard, it's easy to see that both coexist naturally. Authority provides structure, continuity, and protection. Individuality brings spontaneity, sincerity, and warmth. Together, they form a complete tapestry of spiritual life, one that is as delicate as the petals of a lotus floating on water, yet as enduring as the sandstone walls that surround you. As the sun sinks below the horizon, the temple takes on a soft, amber glow. Lanterns are lit once more, their flickering light casting gentle shadows across walls, columns, and altars. You hear the soft hum of prayers whispered, the distant splash of water from the sacred pool, the faint rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. Each sound is subtle, yet it creates a meditative rhythm that slows your own breathing and attention. Even the minor noises, the scraping of a sandal, the shifting of a mat, the drop of a grain, feel like part of a vast, deliberate symphony. You notice a tiny offering left beside the threshold, a bowl of honey, a few sprigs of lotus, and a single date. It is unassuming, almost easy to overlook, yet that embodies the quiet devotion that defines these moments. You realize that the day in the temple, with all its ceremonies, music, festivals, gardens, and libraries, is balanced by these private acts. They are the slow pulse that keeps the temple alive after the grandeur fades, ensuring that devotion continues quietly through the night. In this gentle half-light, you reflect on the continuity of Egyptian worship. From the imposing statues to the smallest personal offerings, from the high priests to the youngest children, Each action contributes to the rhythm of life and eternity. The attention to detail, the integration of sensory, intellectual, and emotional devotion, and the gentle repetition of meaningful acts create a kind of sacred equilibrium. You are reminded that in this culture, devotion was never only about spectacle. It was about sustained care, mindfulness, and connection. Finally, as stars begin to pierce the deepening indigo sky above the temple, you settle near a quiet fountain. The water reflects the lantern light like scattered diamonds, and the soft scent of incense mingles with night air and the fragrance of lotus petals. Your heartbeat slows, synchronized with the gentle rhythms around you. The day's rituals, festivals, offerings, music, and private devotion leave behind a lingering sense of calm. And now, as you feel the final warmth of the day fade into night, remember that devotion is more than actions. It is attention, intention, and care. Even as you leave the temple in your mind, the quiet magic remains. The small gestures, the whispered prayers, the subtle rhythms, and the gentle weaving of human effort with divine presence. Let this calmness carry you as the night deepens, like a soft current beneath the surface, steady and reassuring, guiding you toward rest. The courtyard is almost empty now, the flicker of lanterns casting long, gentle shadows across stone and sand. The soft, cool night air brushes your skin, carrying faint scents of incense, lotus, and distant water. You breathe slowly, allowing your body to sink deeper into this calm, letting your thoughts drift like petals across a quiet pool. The rhythms of the day, chant, music, offering, study, linger in memory, soft echoes in the mind rather than demands on attention. Every small gesture you observed, the flick of a sistrum, the placement of a flower, the whisper of a prayer, remains alive in quiet continuity. Even as night deepens, devotion continues, subtle and enduring. The stars above seem to pulse gently, mirrored in pools of water, connecting earth and sky in an unbroken line. You feel a kinship with every worshiper who has moved through these spaces, a chain of care stretching across centuries. Slowly, your muscles release tension. Your thoughts untangle, and a sense of soft warmth spreads through your chest. You may not see the gods, and you may not hear every prayer, but their presence is felt in the deliberate, gentle cadence of human devotion. This is the sacred rhythm of the temple, patient, persistent, unhurried. You sink further into comfort, imagining lanterns, lotus petals, and whispered prayers around you, a protective, calming cocoon. Now, your breath matches the soft pulse of the temple itself. Allow yourself to drift, carried by the gentle, persistent magic of care and intention. Let the quiet, enduring devotion of ancient Egypt guide you toward peaceful rest. Sleep softly, calmly, and know that you are part of a long, continuous chain of attention, wonder, and connection. Sweet dreams.